So today we're diving into something that I think doesn't
hmm
get nearly enough global attention, even though it absolutely should. The rise of crypto and Web3 events across Africa in 2026. And what's fascinating is that this isn't just about
Right.
tech conferences. It's really about economic shifts, demographics, and real-world use cases shaping an entire ecosystem. And the timing matters too. We're recording this on April 12th,
Yeah,
2026, which is actually the exact day one of these major events kicks off.
exactly. And that's the key point. When people outside the continent think about crypto, they often think speculation or trading. But in Africa, the story is very different. It's much more grounded in necessity, access to stable currencies, cross-border payments, financial inclusion. And these events are basically windows into that reality. They show you not just what people are talking about, but what people are actually building and using.
Right, and just to frame this for
Right.
listeners, we're talking about a full calendar of events across 2026, from April through November, spread across countries like Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and South Africa. So this is not isolated activity. It's a continent-wide movement, with different regions contributing in different ways.
Yes, and what's even more interesting is that some of these events have been running for years. This isn't new. For example, there are conferences that go back to 2015 or 2018. So what we're seeing now is not the beginning, it's the maturation phase. The ecosystem has already gone through early experimentation, and now it's organizing itself in a much more structured way.
That's a really important distinction, because from the outside it can look like a sudden boom, but in reality, it's been building quietly for a long time. And it's being driven by some very
Uh-huh.
specific conditions, like one of the youngest developer populations in the world, right? And also a very mobile-first financial culture.
Exactly. A young, mobile-first population, strong developer growth, and
Mm-hmm.
importantly, real demand for dollar access. Stablecoins, for example, are not theoretical in many African markets. People are actually using them to store value,
Uh-huh.
to hedge against local currency volatility, and to move money across borders in ways that traditional systems can't easily support.
And that's such a contrast to how stablecoins are discussed in, say, the US or Europe, where it's often framed as infrastructure for trading or DeFi. Here, it's more like, this is how I protect my savings. This is how I send money to family. This is how I run a business.
Exactly.
So let's walk through some of these events because each one kind of tells a different story about what's happening on the ground. And the first one is actually quite unusual. Zua Freak 2.0 in
Right.
Kenya, which, as we said, literally starts today, April 12th, 2026.
Yes, and this one really stands out because it's not even a traditional conference. It's described as a pop-up city, which already changes how you think about it. Instead of a two-day event with stages and panels,
Whoa.
this runs for about 3 weeks, April 12th to May 3rd, 2026. So it's not about attending sessions, it's about living and building together.
3 weeks is a completely different level of commitment. That's not something you casually drop into.
It is, and that's intentional. The idea is immersion. Developers, designers, founders, and what they call techno-optimists all come together in Kilifi on the Kenyan coast. There are no keynote stages, no formal structure. It's just co-working, experimenting, building, and learning from each other in real time.
That almost sounds more like a startup residency or even a creative retreat than a conference.
That's exactly what it is. And the value comes from time. In a typical conference, you meet
Hmm.
someone, exchange contacts, and maybe follow up later. But here, you're working side by side for weeks. Relationships deepen, ideas evolve, and projects actually get built instead of just discussed.
And the location matters too, right? Kalifi seems to be becoming a kind of experimental hub for these formats.
Yes, the Kenyan coast has become known for these more experimental, community-driven Web3
Mm-hmm.
gatherings. It blends local developer ecosystems with an international crowd drawn to the format itself. So you get this mix of global perspective and local context,
Whoa.
which is, honestly, really powerful.
So that's a very immersive, builder-focused experience. Then you contrast that with something like the Africa Blockchain DeFi and Web3 Summit in Lagos, which is almost the opposite, a high-density, one-day event.
Exactly. That event, happening April 29, 2026, is all about compression. It brings together innovators, investors, builders, regulators, and entrepreneurs into a single day packed with keynotes, panels, workshops, startup pitches, and exhibitions. It's designed for maximum exposure in minimum time.
Lagos seems to come up a lot in these conversations. There's clearly something happening there.
For good reason. Lagos is one of the most active Web3 hubs in Africa. It has a dense developer ecosystem, a lot of entrepreneurial energy, and a strong connection to real-world financial challenges. So events there tend to reflect that intensity. Fast-paced, high energy, very practical.
So if Zoo Freak is about depth over time,
That makes sense.
Lagos is about breadth in a short burst.
That's a perfect way to put it. Different formats, but both valuable depending on what you're looking for.
Then we move into May,
Oh,
and there's the
interesting.
Kenya Blockchain and Crypto Conference in Nairobi. This one feels more established and structured.
Yes, this is the 6th edition,
Oh, wow.
so it actually has some history behind it. It's expected to bring in over 1,500 attendees, regulators, investors, industry leaders. And what's really interesting is the theme for 2026. Stablecoins, payments, and the next phase of Africa's digital economy.
That ties directly into what we were talking about earlier. Real-world usage, not just theory.
Exactly. This isn't abstract. Cross-border payments and remittances are massive issues across Africa. Traditional systems can be slow, expensive, and fragmented. So stablecoins and blockchain-based solutions are stepping in to solve real problems. Problems that millions of people face every day.
And I noticed something else about this event. It actively involves regulators, which is not always the case in other regions.
Yes, and that's crucial. In many regions, there's a disconnect between builders
Exactly.
and regulators. But in Africa, particularly in East Africa, there's a growing effort to bring both into the same room. That creates a more realistic path to adoption, because you're not building in isolation.
Right.
Because if you're building something that people are actually going to use, you can't ignore regulation. These events recognize that,
For
and they
sure.
create space for those conversations early in the process.
Then in June, things get even more interesting with the Afrochain Summit in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is not always the first country people think of when they think about Web3.
True, but that's changing. Ethiopia has a large population, a growing tech sector, and increasing attention from institutional players. Afrochain is designed to connect global blockchain, AI, and finance leaders with that local market.
So it's not just about developers. It's also about institutions and long-term investment.
Exactly. There's a strong focus on capital deployment, digital economy strategy, and market entry. It's one of the few events that explicitly targets organizations exploring Ethiopia as a serious market opportunity.
And the venue itself, the Addis Ababa Science Museum, feels symbolic in a way.
It does. It reinforces the idea that this is about innovation and long-term development,
Totally.
not just short-term trends. The setting matters, because it shapes how people think about the conversation.
Then, still in June, we have the Africa Payments and RegTech Forum in Johannesburg, which shifts the focus again toward financial systems.
Yes, this one is more focused on financial services and regulation. It covers digital payments, blockchain, DeFi, AI, cybersecurity, but always through the lens of real-world financial infrastructure and inclusion.
And South Africa plays a specific role here, right?
Absolutely. South Africa has one of the most developed financial markets on the continent, so the regulatory frameworks are more advanced, and conversations tend to be more detailed and technical. That makes it a key hub for these discussions.
So this is less about experimentation and more about integration into existing systems.
Exactly. It's about how emerging technologies fit into established financial structures and how they can help close gaps in access.
Then later in the year, we see something interesting in Nigeria, but not in Lagos. The Abia Web3 and Digital Economy Conference in Aba.
Yes, and that's a really important signal. It shows that Web3 activity in Nigeria is not limited to Lagos. I mean, people assume it's all Lagos all the time.
Really?
But Aba is a major commercial hub. And this event highlights just how distributed innovation actually is across the country.
So it's more decentralized even at the ecosystem level.
Exactly. And it brings together over 2,000 participants with a mix of policy dialogue, developer sessions, and startup exhibitions. So again, you see that blend of building and navigating the environment.
Right.
And that dual focus is what makes these events effective. It's not just about technology, it's about context.
Then we get into October with one of the longest running events, the Blockchain Africa Conference.
Yes, this is the 12th edition, and it's been running since 2015. It has attracted over 10,900 attendees from 165 countries. That kind of track record puts it in a completely different category from newer events.
That's global scale, not just regional relevance.
Exactly. This is a destination event. For international attendees looking to engage with Africa's Web3 ecosystem, this is often the anchor point.
So if someone wants a single entry point into the continent's Web3 scene,
For sure.
this might be it.
Yes, because it combines history, credibility, and international reach in a way that, honestly, very few other events can even come close to.
Then in November, things really ramp up. Multiple events, including the Africa Blockchain Festival in Kigali. That one's a big deal.
Yes, Kigali is positioning itself very deliberately as a digital economy hub. The festival brings together global attendees and covers a wide range of topics: AI, blockchain, policy, hackathons, and even deal rooms for investment.
So it's more comprehensive than some of the others.
Exactly. But in a good way. It's not narrowly focused. It's designed to capture the full spectrum of the digital economy, which really does reflect Rwanda's broader strategy.
And Rwanda has been very intentional about that positioning.
Yes, it's a strategic move to attract global attention and investment.
Then there's the Africa Tech Festival in Cape Town, which seems to operate at a completely different scale. Completely different compared to everything else.
It does. It's the largest tech event on the continent, bringing together telecom operators, governments, startups, investors, and more. And Web3 is just one thread in a much larger conversation about technology and infrastructure.
So this is where you see how blockchain fits into the bigger picture.
Exactly. It's about understanding how Web3 interacts with AI, connectivity, digital infrastructure, and policy at scale. That broader context is incredibly valuable.
And finally, Crypto Fest in Cape Town, which closes out the season right after that.
Yes, and this one is more community-oriented. It's been running every year since 2018, bringing together developers, investors, and ecosystem builders in a more informal setting compared to the larger conferences.
So after all these large global events, this brings it back to the community level.
Exactly. It's a fitting end to the year, more personal, more grounded, but still connected to the broader ecosystem.
So when you step back and look at all of this, 10 events across 5 countries spanning almost the entire year, what does it tell us?
It tells us that Africa's Web3 ecosystem is not just growing, it's organizing. These events are infrastructure in their own way. They connect people, ideas, capital, and regulation. And they reflect real economic needs, not just trends or hype cycles.
And that might be the most important takeaway. This isn't hype-driven growth. It's demand-driven.
Exactly. And that makes it much more sustainable in the long term. When people are using these technologies because they need them,
Right.
not just because they're trendy, you get a very different kind of ecosystem.
So, if someone is listening and trying to understand where the next major developments in Web3 might come from, Africa should absolutely be on their radar.
Without a doubt. And not just as an emerging market,
Mm-hmm.
but as a place where some of the most practical, real-world innovations are happening right now. Index equals 0.
All right, I think that's a great place to wrap. This has been a fascinating look at how events can tell a much, much bigger story about technology, economics, and society, especially in a region that's often underestimated.
Agreed. And it will be really interesting to see how the rest of 2026 unfolds, especially with so many of these events still ahead of us.
Absolutely. We'll definitely keep an eye on it. Thanks for the conversation.